palco Cesare Fertonani, professore di musicologia, docente di storia della musica moderna e contemporanea all'Università di Milano. Questo è un incontro abituale che abbiamo per far conoscere meglio il nostro Leone d'Oro, ed è per questo che adesso chiamo sul palco Sir George Benjamin. George è arrivato ieri sera da Torino, dove ha assistito alle prove di Original Scheme, che questa sera sarà eseguito dall'orchestra della RAI, subito dopo la premiazione e la consegna del Leone d'Oro. Conosco George da 25 anni, è una persona squisita, di una intelligenza superiore, di una musicalità straordinaria. Noi oggi gli porremo alcune domande allo scopo di così svelare anche qualche segreto e comunque qualche aspetto che un personaggio pubblico come lui magari non ha l'occasione di rivelarci. George Benjamin è uno dei rappresentanti più importanti della sua generazione e a me piace definirlo un classico, tra virgolette, del nostro tempo. Che cosa intendo con questo? Intendo identificare, ce ne sono anche altri di compositori, artisti che affondano le loro radici nella cultura, in questo caso della musica occidentale, e la traducono e la trasformano con un linguaggio attuale. Nel caso di George Benjamin, un linguaggio assolutamente raffinato e incisivo, come avremo modo di ascoltare stasera con questa opera. Opera Original Scheme, che Benjamin ha decisamente voluto che fosse rappresentata, e quindi la prima domanda che gli farò è: che cosa rappresenta per lui Original Scheme, un'opera che ha fatto il giro del mondo, pur non essendo datata di tanti anni, è un'opera abbastanza recente, anche se dopo Benjamin ha scritto un'altra, e quindi Lesson in Violence, in Love and Violence. Ora, George, per te quest'opera che cosa rappresenta? Perché sei molto affezionato.
Firstly, thank you, Ivan, for your very kind words, which I appreciate so much, and thank you very much for having me here in Venice today. It means a great amount to me. What does this opera represent? Well, I think it's quite simple. I loved opera from my childhood, and therefore I wanted completely naturally to write an opera, some operas always, and I was unable to do that for 25 years. I couldn't find the right collaborator, and also I didn't feel I had sufficient technique, but also I needed to work on the aesthetic issues, the problems as I saw it, that faced opera in the 20th and 21st century. So, put very simply, it was, what is the English word? I'm having trouble finding it. It was a form of liberation for me to be able to write an opera, because it's something I wanted to do since I was 10 years old, and so at last to be able to do it. I remember when I was writing smaller pieces beforehand, many of them had the intention of leading me towards opera. I remember thinking when I was in the middle of a piece, this is maybe like a lake or a big river maybe, but an opera must be like an ocean, a whole world. And I remember thinking I would so love to do that one day, and during my time of waiting, often I felt it would never happen, but at last I was able to do it. Thanks foremost to my collaborator, the British playwright Martin Crimp.
Sì, nelle tre opere da lei sinora composte, tutte sul libretto appunto di Martin Crimp, ecco, il tema comune, al di là delle differenze strutturali e drammaturgiche, sembra essere il nesso indissolubile che lega amore, violenza e potere. Ecco, magari ci potrebbe raccontare qualcosa al riguardo.
Martin and I didn't decide when we met that we must choose these 3 themes for our operas, and in fact we've never discussed that issue, but you are completely right, but it's not intentional. I could reply to you, if you take away love, you take away violence and power, maybe death, what else is there to write about in an opera?
Certo, però io avevo già un'altra domanda da farti, perché è chiaro che questi sono temi classici, se mancano questi temi, in generale il 90% del teatro non crolla. Ma allora esiste anche però il tema buffo, per esempio, ironico, surreale. Hai mai pensato o pensi che potrebbe essere un mondo da abitare con la tua musica in futuro? Ti faccio questa domanda perché noi al college, stiamo facendo un'esperienza da molti anni già, il college musica, dove selezioniamo dei giovani compositori e chiediamo loro di presentarsi con questa call internazionale con un progetto appunto di teatro buffo, di teatro ironico, surreale, perché crediamo che in fondo sia anche più difficile far sorridere che far piangere. Ecco, che cosa ne pensi anche di questo aspetto del teatro che esiste? E qui a Venezia abbiamo un Goldoni, voglio dire che è un riferimento forte.
You're right, it's more difficult. I have to say, if I remember the operas that I most love, they are often confronting dark themes. So I'm thinking of Wozzeck or Pelias or Tristan. That perhaps is the greatest skill, if not purpose of opera, to confront what is dark or what is true about ourselves. There's one other thing, that when people laugh, they make a noise. And that means they might miss a chord or a very important note, which would be a shame if it cost me 2 weeks. At least if they cry, they do it silently, sometimes. But you're right. I think of the funny operas, and they're very rare, and I would like one day, if I have the good luck, to find the right subject. I think of 2. One is L'Enfant des Sortilèges of Ravel, which is both very funny and very moving. There you have both. And the other one is Jenny Skiki, which is perfection. And when I listened to that for the first time, only about 10, 15 years ago, with a recording, the old recording, the famous old recording, I was laughing in my home while listening to it. So that is extremely difficult to do. But challenges are exciting, so I hope one day.
Senta, la sua musica ha un grande respiro internazionale e si è sempre alimentata di suggestioni provenienti da molteplici orizzonti e ambiti culturali, dalla Francia di Messiaen, dello spettralismo sino all'India, alle musiche etniche di diversi continenti. Ecco, ma come descriverebbe invece il suo rapporto con la tradizione musicale inglese, britannica?
Listen, a question. I am British, as you can hear. But music, I'm not a nationalist. And as a child, I was excited by anything that simply appealed to my ears. So my first love, without question, was Beethoven, and then Berlioz, and then Mahler, and then Stravinsky, and then Debussy. And it really seemed completely irrelevant to me where the music came from. Now, I know that wasn't always the case with the composers. Stravinsky was being, in his early period, a real Russian composer. And that's been the case in the 20th century with nationalism. But in terms of my predilections as a person, I prefer my ears to be rather innocent, and whatever I like interests me, and if it moves me, I don't know why, and I try to discover whether it is Indian music, whether it is Monteverdi, whether it is Purcell, or whether it is the most modern pieces written anywhere in the world. As for my relationship with British music, I never thought that I wanted to write British music myself. I just write the music I want to write. There's some composers who have been very important to me. Purcell is extremely important to me. I'm not the greatest lover of Benjamin Britten's music, but all the same as an opera composer, his contribution to the world of opera, and particularly to British opera, is outstanding. Vaughan Williams, I'm fond of. Tippett, Burt Whistle, my very great friend Oliver Nusson. These are many people whose music means a lot to me. Also, I think, and I breathe British, I live there, and my approach to theatre, I think particularly must be unlike that of any other traditional country. But it's not really something that I think about very much. I unfortunately, it may be an illusion, feel a certain freedom to do what I want, and I just do that.
Giorgio, io ricordo quando, forse un po' più di 20 anni fa, ci incontrammo a Parigi in casa dei amici musicisti e tu al pianoforte improvvisasti in diversi stili di autori classici e anche contemporanei Jingle Bells, arrangiato appunto secondo quegli stili. E mi colpì tanto la versione Messiaen, che se un musicista conosce l'autore francese sa che non è per niente facile e per niente intuitiva. Allora, a parte il fatto che quello mi svelò una parte del tuo carattere che adoro, ma a proposito di Messiaen, tu sei stato allievo di Messiaen per 2 anni al Conservatorio Nazionale Superiore di Parigi, essendo anche, cioè quella classe è stata frequentata da rappresentanti importanti dello spettacalismo, alcuni erano già usciti come Grisè, forse Dufour anche, altri erano ancora lì, come Tristan Murail. Allora la mia domanda riguarda proprio questo, come vedi, come interpreti tu la pedagogia, il rapporto con l'insegnamento e con i giovani? Tu sei stato docente al Royal College, hai preso il posto hai rilevato la cattedra di Harrison Whitwistell e quindi mi sembra che l'aspetto pedagogico, che io considero fondamentale, se sai qualcosa hai il dovere etico di trasmetterla, e però ognuno di noi la gestisce differentemente. Tu come la vedi? Che cosa hai da dire al riguardo?
I had wonderful teachers. There was a man called Peter Gellhorn in London when I was a young teenager, and then when I was 16 I went to Messiaen in Paris, which was an extraordinary experience, and then afterwards to Cambridge with Alexander Goehn, whose father was an important student at Schoenberg, and so I had the great fortune of having really wonderful teachers, and I do remember Messiaen saying, I could see how much he adored teaching, how he loved to have contact with young composers from across the world, how much it gave him, and he always said he taught to learn, and that struck me as being interesting. So it was natural for me, starting my life as a musician, that one of the ways one earns one's living, not through commissions at the beginning of one's life, is to teach, and I immediately enjoyed it. So for 18 years I taught at the Royal College of Music, as you said, and then in the last 20 years I've been teaching at university, King's College London, and I do a mixture of things. I give classes when I talk about things which interest, worry, fascinate, excite me. I never repeat a class, they're always world premieres, and then now I have individual students, and they come, as I think is the case with you, Ivan, from not only from Great Britain, but from Europe and elsewhere. And it's stimulating and interesting, and again one learns from one's students, and one learns also from the activity of teaching, because you have to have, I believe, things clear in your mind in order to explain them to others. And to be clear in the mind is helpful for the composer. Plus, there's one other thing. Like at the moment, I have a Finnish student, a Korean student, and a British student, and they've been composing lots and lots. They come to me for private lessons. And when they compose lots, and they come each week or 2 weeks, 3 weeks, with lots of paper, and I see that they're not only are they being productive, but maybe they're making some progress. That is, as I'm sure you agree, that is, it's a wonderful thing to do. So it feeds me as a person, but also as an artist, I think.
Mi fa piacere che tu condivida quello che anch'io penso e vivo, nel senso che dover formalizzare quello che naturalmente per noi è un'attività creativa, formalizzarla per presentarla ai ragazzi è un modo per renderci più chiare le cose e per imparare anche. Poi si impara tantissimo anche da giovani, non dimentichiamo che poi non sono ragazzini, sono ragazzi di 20, 21, 25 anni, quindi persone anche mature che hanno già fatto studi e hanno già una personalità formata, non hanno magari una tecnica, o comunque la tecnica non è sufficiente, però hanno tante cose da dire, tante idee nuove, e questo è un modo per non solo restare in contatto con i giovani, ma soprattutto appunto per continuare a imparare, che non si finisce mai. Volevo dire solo una cosa, tu condividi con me l'opinione su Beethoven, tu parlavi prima di Beethoven e dicevi che Beethoven è stato il tuo primo amore. Io Beethoven lo definisco il più grande compositore contemporaneo. Uso questo paradosso perché? Perché Beethoven è un eterno classico la cui innovazione, seppure è stata significativa nella sua epoca, riusciamo a cogliere anche oggi come tale, non riusciamo a cristallizzarlo in un modello definito. Ci sembra sempre un compositore in movimento che ci può dire e dare sempre qualcosa. Sei d'accordo con questo?
I agree 100% with everything you said, completely. Very eloquently explained and expressed. As for Beethoven, I could tell you that my collaborator in opera, Martin Krimp, is also a very, very fine pianist. And 2 weeks ago, we played the Eroica Symphony, piano 4 hands, which was a huge pleasure. This is a piece I know since I was 7 years old and loved. I was astonished playing the music, the adventure of the form and the quality of the material and the depth of feeling, but also the sheer imagination. It was so thrilling. I also heard, I was in a festival in Europe 1 month ago, and I heard a magnificent performance of the 9th Symphony. And again, this music which I worshipped when I was a little boy, I don't hear it all the time now, but to come direct to it, it just was overwhelming. And it also reminded me something that people don't talk about very much about Beethoven. They talk about the form, they talk about the harmonic shape and everything, but the sound the man makes in the orchestra, with his small orchestra, 2 trumpets, well in the 9th Symphony there's 4 horns and trombones, but the sheer, the quality of sound, part of it is to do with the amount of counterpoint in the orchestration. There's such a degree of activity, but it's so wonderfully positioned and so incredibly conceived. So this music is a miracle, and to come back to it can do nothing but fill one's mind with, hopefully with ideas and thoughts.
Ecco, per tornare all'apprendimento e all'insegnamento, questo rapporto circolare che c'è sempre tra appunto insegnare e apprendere, qual è stata l'importanza per lei del rapporto con Messiaen e poi con lo spettralismo?
I was in Paris 1976 to 1978. So I attended the first performance of, I think it was Transitoire à Gérard Griset, which really was one of the first big pieces of spectralism. So spectralism almost hadn't started. When I was in Messiaen's class, Tristan Muraille came and brought his early ensemble piece, Mémoire Érosion. So I knew this music, but not very much. I got to know it after. And I performed in the 1980s many times this music in Great Britain. In a way, I brought it to my country. I'm not a spectral composer. I never was, I never will be, but it doesn't stop me having a lot of affection and admiration for the best music written by that school, if we can call it that. But as for Messiaen himself, he was completely wonderful. I was 16, I was so young, and he was so kind to me and so welcoming, and he was a great man and a great artist, a great composer, but he was a very simple person in the best way. He was dignified and extraordinary in his degree of knowledge and sensitivity, but also as a person, he was extremely, the only word I can use is sweet. He was extremely kind, generous, enthusiastic, devoted to his teaching. And so it was a transformative experience for me. One other thing that made him a wonderful teacher of so many different composers was that he tolerated, if not encouraged, difference in his students. He did not want to make a school. And even though it can be painful for a teacher when a student goes their own way, and maybe a long way away from the teacher, he not only tolerated that, as some teachers find difficult, but he also actively encouraged it. So he was an extraordinary person, and my memory of him is very profound gratitude and love.
Quest'ultima cosa che hai detto la trovo essenziale per quanto riguarda l'insegnamento, cioè quello di lasciare libertà. Da questo punto di vista è molto più difficile insegnare, perché è molto più facile dire che cosa devi fare piuttosto che seguirti in un percorso. È un procedimento maieutico quest'ultimo, che è piuttosto impegnativo e anche stressante da parte di un docente che lo faccia con passione. Vorrei adesso, passando dallo spettralismo, arrivare all'IRCAM, dove tu hai prodotto un pezzo, Antara, ed è, credo, correggimi se sbaglio, la tua unica esperienza nello studio dell'IRCAM, dove l'elettronica è gestita da un campionatore. La domanda che ti voglio fare è a proposito appunto della tecnologia. Qual è il tuo rapporto con la tecnologia? Tecnologia che oggi sembra in qualche modo occupare uno spazio importante nella produzione contemporanea, una tecnologia che dalla musica si sta estendendo anche al visual, dove musica e immagini che prima venivano, come posso dire, sovrapposte, ora si integrano con sistemi compositivi come il sound reactive, dove i parametri del suono stimolano delle immagini che in tempo reale compaiono su vari schermi. Allora, qual è il tuo rapporto in generale con la tecnologia e con la tecnologia applicata alla musica?
Well, we all have an intimate connection to technology today. We can't avoid it, and it brings many very positive things into our world and some other less positive things into our world. It's true, I spent 3 years at IRCAM in the 1980s, and I have not returned to technology since. I really love electronic sound. Some of the timbre and harmonies you can produce are completely extraordinary and delicious, if I could say so, for the ear. Also, my time in IRCAM was a time in which I reflected on the nature of music. What is music? Is music sound? What is the relationship between performing music? Is the performer necessary? And I came away with many important lessons from my progress, I think, as a composer. And in particular, and to my surprise, on the structural level, the rational organization of computerized music gave me ideas for music in all ways, and how to organize and how to achieve a more supple, maybe more complex morphology and sense of structure in my work. But I am a performing musician. I was as a child, and I remain a performing musician today. And I value the nature of performance and spontaneity more than perhaps almost any other element, and the tension that goes with it, and the difficulty that goes with it. And up to now, for myself personally, I do not find that technology, however sophisticated it is, can match the intimate relationship between a viola player, a bow, and their fingers. And even more so, the complexity and richness and infinite capacity of the human voice to express and make meaning through sound. So, you know, time is not infinite in life. Also, I have to understand that, unlike you and several of my colleagues, also I don't believe that my gifts are particularly strong in that direction. I tried, and I don't think I entirely succeeded. So I've concentrated on the things that I feel are maybe more my terrain, while not being antagonistic at all to other successes and triumphs in that direction. But I followed my own personal predilection and route.
Assolutamente d'accordo con te, e poi c'è anche un altro aspetto che mi permetto di sottolineare, che la tecnologia soffre dell'obsolescenza. Cioè il rapporto della tecnologia col tempo è un rapporto che ne abbassa il valore, nel senso che entrano nuovi strumenti sempre più performanti. Il rapporto dell'oggetto d'arte e anche la scrittura semplice invece col tempo può acquistare valore, se questo lavoro è un lavoro di qualità. Questa è la grande qualità dell'opera d'arte rispetto al totem tecnologico. La tecnologia è uno strumento, e questo credo che anche i giovani lo debbano capire.
Sì, c'è un aspetto che mi ha sempre incuriosito, perché nella sua produzione si potrebbe dire che la qualità è inversamente proporzionale alla quantità. Cioè, il suo catalogo a tutt'oggi è abbastanza contenuto. Ecco, ci potrebbe parlare del rapporto che nella sua attività di compositore c'è tra la fase, diciamo così, progettuale e poi la realizzazione, la fase realizzativa della scrittura. Io sono rimasto colpito del fatto che, per esempio, per alcune delle sue opere teatrali lei ha raccontato proprio dei mesi che le sono serviti per arrivare alla scrittura, alla stesura finale della partitura.
In fact, I'm a composer who writes very fast, but it takes me a very long time to get fast. So to start a piece it seems often truly impossible, and it can take me months to write the first bars of a piece. By the end of the piece, I'm writing like a crazy guy, and I can give you an example in the opera tonight, written on skin. The first scene I wrote, 8 minutes, scene 4, it took me 6 months to write. And then I had to orchestrate it and etc. So it took me half a year. The last 6 or 7 scenes of the opera, fully orchestrated, 35 minutes of music with orchestra, took me 4 months, fully orchestrated. So writing operas in particular, I get really fast, but it takes me a long time to arrive at that. And it's just that you learn about yourself as life goes along, and you discover your natural rhythm, and that just seems to be the one that I'm afraid I have. But also, I am very picky. I am very fussy. I like details, and I like the big picture, also the form. And I try to get things right. And if it doesn't come, I have to wait. And if it doesn't come 87 times I try 88th time till it gets right. And that can take time. And there's one other thing. To write today is maybe more difficult than before. It's maybe more interesting, but it's maybe more difficult because the rules that you used to have before, we have this wonderful freedom, but that costs. It means that to integrate a language harmonically, polyphonically, rhythmically, there's a lot of work to form the language of each piece. That takes a lot of time and effort before you even reach the first note. And then finally, the world doesn't need 500 pieces from a composer today. It would be a shame to be Dittersdorf, you know, or even Haydn, because it's a different world now. And I believe you either write pieces which are singular, which inhabit a specific terrain, and live a world that is maybe like almost complete in itself, or be quiet. Don't write. That's my feeling. But then, you know, I just worked with my great dear friend Wolfgang Riem, and in Lucerne last month, and his attitude is entirely different. And my God, he writes some wonderful, wonderful pieces. So everybody to their own. That's just the way that I found I can do.
Sì, Wolfgang Riem, che tra l'altro ha un catalogo di alcune centinaia di pezzi, credo che siano più di 600, quindi è qualcosa di straordinario per il nostro tempo. E allora, George, facci entrare un po' nel tuo atelier, nel senso, c'è un luogo prediletto per comporre, c'è un momento prediletto, quali sono le condizioni nelle quali tu ti senti veramente a tuo agio nel comporre, se ci sono o se sono molteplici?
I don't really feel at ease in composing. Some people do, I don't. I have the feeling that the next note that I write, it has to sound good, and you feel right in its context, both in its relationship to what's just happened, what's happening at the same time, and what's about to happen. But I also have the sensation that every little decision you make has an effect on the form of the whole piece. One choice is an addition to the complete structure of the piece. This means that there's a great amount of instability while working, I think, and also the pressure of decision making is intense. So it's not really easy to be at ease. I don't feel that. I'm at ease in between pieces. I work in my home, in my studio in the attic. I would love to be like Stravinsky, who got up, had 2 whiskeys, then breakfast, and then composed till 1 o'clock, had lunch, and then went to parties and movies. And he did that his whole life. And his teacher, Rimsky-Korsakov, I was at his home in St. Petersburg a few months ago, and he also did the same. He got up at 8, started working, and at 12 stopped and never composed anymore, maybe orchestrated in the evening. But in other words, to have an organized and strict regime, I think that is quite healthy. Unfortunately, it's too late for me to develop one. And so I start in the morning, and I stop late at night, and between the 2 borders, if I find something, I'm happy, and I don't always. I do have lunch at 12, and I have for a Mediterranean culture, this will seem to you very savage. I have my dinner at 6 p.m. And that's about the only order that I have.
Sì, prima ricordava giustamente che lei è anche un performer, del resto ha anche un'attività di pianista, di direttore d'orchestra. Ecco, in particolare come interpreta la direzione d'orchestra e il ruolo di direttore? Anche perché lei ha un repertorio molto vasto in realtà, che va dai classici, da Mozart appunto fino alla contemporaneità, diretto tra l'altro le prime esecuzioni assolute di molti pezzi importanti di suoi colleghi.
"20 years ago, I conducted much more than I do now. I love it. I love contact with musicians. I really, is something I usually enjoy tremendously, but I can't compose while I'm conducting. I cannot compose when I have the music of real music in my head and the music of other composers, music I will usually love. I can't, it doesn't allow me the space in my head. So it's very dangerous. So I've cut back enormously. In a year that I write an opera, I will allow myself one time, maybe two, the whole year. And in other years, maybe half a dozen, 5 or 6 times. So I don't want to be a conductor who composes. I'm a composer who sometimes conducts. But that said, I love the contact with musicians. I love to conduct works of my colleagues, but I also conduct Berg or Messiaen or Ligeti, and I have done Berlioz and Janacek, Stravinsky, even Mozart and Schumann. So that is a huge, huge pleasure. For myself as a composer, yes, when a piece is new, to be able to shape it with my own hands and listen and correct and change things with my own ears, that is a special thing, which I very much value, but I also very much like it when others do my pieces well. I underline well. In fact, they can bring other characters, other feelings, and maybe their attitude to my own music is, in a way, I don't know about more relaxed, but when there's a special tension associated with conducting your own pieces, which isn't maybe useful for a conductor, and one must learn to get rid of that tension, which is it's not easy to do. You can try and you can get a little bit more experience every few times you do it. But equally, when I'm under the baton of a real maestro who understands, I can think of a performance I had earlier this year, a few months ago, of my latest opera, that was so marvelous, and I preferred it to my version.
Quindi George Benjamin, compositore, che dirige anche, ma hai svolto anche un'attività di direttore artistico. E come si configura anche questa attività all'interno della tua vita di musicista? Come la vedi, come la interpreti? Sicuramente da compositore avrai un punto di vista particolare.
I was very active in the world of modern music and promoting it and in charge of some festivals in my lifetime. Very active, particularly until about the year 2002-2003. And I like the idea of composers being involved in the music world. They have potentially an interesting view of musical life and musical history and even the future. And I do think they can, I'm thinking of perhaps above all of Pierre Boulez and what extraordinary things he did, not only in France, but around the world, and very, very greatly in Britain as well. But I made a sort of decision once I started writing operas. I could see they required me to have a real deep sense of isolation for years. My teaching diminishes when I write operas, almost to zero. My conducting stops. And I really don't want the outside world, almost at all. I really don't want people to contact me. People, except 1 or 2 very close friends, don't telephone me. I try desperately to keep clear of email, which is, for me, a terrible danger and risk. And I live in London still, but I become almost a hermit, and it's the only way I can write. Without that, I just can't get the mood and the concentration. So I've diminished my outside life very, very much, and so that means I have very little role now, beyond just writing, trying to write.
Ecco, credo sia molto interessante per noi anche chiederle come vede il ruolo di artista e di intellettuale nella società contemporanea.
Forgive me, an artist and an intellectual are different things. An artist has to be an intellectual. You have to think, you have to be able to analyze yourself and the whole world. But it's not the same as being an artist. So there's a slight, perhaps that's an Anglo-Saxon way of looking at things, but it's crucial. You have to have an intellect, but it's not the primary purpose. Your primary purpose is to give a vision through the senses to the world, be it painting, be it cinema, be it, of course, music, or be it the written word. What is one's purpose? There are many things artists and musicians do. They teach, they open up worlds, they can entertain, they can move, they promote and encourage thought in others. They encourage, one hopes, sensitivity, if not individuality, into the spirits and minds of others. Many things we contribute, perhaps not as contemporary composers so much, to the economy of our countries in a small way, very small way, in fact a negative way, if we're talking of contemporary music, but other artists do in popular music, tremendously so, and we maybe have a tangential political influence on the nature, or we can be used politically, and we have to be careful of that. But all these things, and I'm sure that many others, are not so important, really. In the end, you write music because you have a desire, a need to do it, and because you love music, more maybe than anything else in the world. And that's enough. That's enough. You have to do it well. You have to be faithful to your own time and be authentic. And it's not as simple as it sounds. It certainly is not. But at the background is simply that this phenomenon of moving and speaking to people and conjuring up imaginary worlds through their ears is a sort of glorious mystery. Why is it so powerful? Why is it so, it can be so moving and speak to us so profoundly? And that needs to be, that magic element needs to be the big decider, not for any other reason at all.
Ritornando ai giovani, tu sei un autore e come tutti gli autori in qualche modo si propongono come modello, anche se non lo vogliono, sono un modello per i giovani artisti, nel caso nostro i giovani compositori. Se tu dovessi dare un consiglio a un giovane compositore che voglia intraprendere questa strada così faticosa, o dei consigli, quali sarebbero? Soprattutto nella relazione sia col proprio mestiere e sia col mondo.
I don't consider myself really a model. I think the way I compose is rather eccentric and unadvisable for other people. But the values that I try to speak for, of having craftsmanship and of having a sense of structure and having really precise inner hearing, those are things which you can transmit. And also technical things about notation, about the knowledge of instruments and knowledge of the combination of instruments, technical things. I would, not as a model, but I can help. I feel I can, up to a limited way, I can help young composers if they come to me for that. I think it's hard to be a composer, and it always was very difficult in all times. When I was young, there was a dogma in the air, and I'm talking very specifically about the beginning of the 1970s. If I'd been born 5 or 10 years earlier, it would have been different. And there was a dogma to do with serialism. Serialism is an extraordinary invention in 20th century music. It has, in my view, some very, very serious mistakes in the DNA of the rules of how it is. But the idea behind it and its relationship to composition is extraordinary, very interesting. But then it was taught as a type of dogma, and the associated rules with it were a sort of dogma. And I, as a young guy, thought, why these rules, these imposed rules? I don't agree with them. This leads to a certain type of music that I don't want. And so I felt myself, we all have to be rebellious in some way as a young person. It's necessary. And my rebellion was against the orthodoxy of serialism, of the type of constructivism that was prevalent in the 1970s, which didn't have the excitement of 20 years before, and it had become, like with all revolutionary things, it had become a dogma. I really despise dogmas. So that was my starting point. Now the problem today is that the situation is different. There are many, many different types of schools, and not one overriding, all-important one. So a young composer today has to really find, it's very difficult to find which route to choose. It's natural for a young composer to follow others, their contemporaries, and indeed it's essential to copy them at first, and then move away from them. But I think it's very, very important that composers follow their own voice, and maybe there's slightly too much complacency. There's too many people follow one particular, or two or three particular things. Well, I would say to young composers, do that, but then stop doing it. Find your own route, find something of your own to do. Of course, now with the internet, which is a great gift, we can look at YouTube and we can find adequate, if not excellent, performances of the complete history of Western music and other musics also, with a touch of a button. That means there's so much music available to our ears. It can be, in part that's wonderful, because you can find what you love and then make that your own. The danger is that everything is there and one is lost in a great excess of choice. And then, to cope with that, I think this is the biggest danger, to cope with that. As it were, like an ostrich, to put your neck in the sand. What you do is you find a very, very small thing and you follow that with almost religious devotion, as opposed to remaining open to music and open to the world. So it's difficult for young composers. I would feel that you would be very lonely if you were really, really thinking deeply about starting to be a composer today. But then Mussorgsky was lonely, and Debussy must have been lonely, and all composers, Janacek or Berlioz, you know, it's impossible not to be. So every time has its challenges and difficulties. In the end, it's just very hard, and you have to be very obstinate and very persistent.
Io ringrazio Giorgio per questo bellissimo incontro e lascerei la parola a qualcuno del pubblico che volesse porgli delle domande.
Io volevo sapere se lei è un uomo
Who knows what life has ahead? And composing is difficult, so I'm not at my most happiest when I'm composing. But I touch wood that I've been very fortunate, and I take great joy in being alive.
Io volevo tornare su una domanda appena accennata all'inizio. Why opera?
And I'm a little bit moved to say this here in this city, because my real feeling is it's the best thing that's ever been invented. It's true. I just think the human voice is a miracle. I love the orchestra is also a very great invention, and theatre is obviously something essential to human beings, and you put it together, and it's just extraordinary. I just find opera, the great performances of great operas I've been to are the most moving experiences I've had as a spectator in my life. Nothing, not the greatest novels or the most beautiful paintings, most staggering architecture, wonderful films, nothing I don't know why, but nothing moves me as much as opera.
Tempo per l'ultima domanda.
A Small World, I took part 1 year by Wolfgang Rihm, listening to his progress composing. And Wolfgang Rihm, it is 10 years ago, presented your works 2 weeks. We listened only your works, and it was the most concentrated and most appreciated moment in the 1 year listening to the students and to Wolfgang Rihm. So I really want to thank you. And my question, in this loneliness, and I'm convinced if Mark Rothko, if the Giaconetti, it doesn't matter, without loneliness and being out of the world, it is not possible to create whatever it is. Is there a relationship where you are living? Is it London? Is it a city? Is it like Venice? I listen in Nono's music also, Venice as an environment. May I ask, what is your, besides all the arts, you understand my question?
I live outside, not far outside the centre of London, in my enormous city. But when I compose, my geography reduces to about a square kilometre around where I live. I go to my park, I will buy food, and I have my family, my partner, my friends, but I don't see the outside world at all. And but that's because I think because I'm strange, you know. Other people can live a more normal, full existence while writing. If I understood correctly, was this in Karlsruhe that you were talking about with Wolfgang?
Right.
Oh, I'm very touched. You know, I've known Wolfgang since 1982, so almost 40 years, and we are different as creators. His catalogue is 600, mine is about 30. And we see each other once every 3-4 years. But when we're together, we're like brothers, but very happy brothers because we laugh hugely. And I had not seen him for 6 years in Lucerne, and I was there for 2 weeks, and we had a lot of time together, and it was immensely meaningful and touching for me. He's a really Ivan. Not every composer is molto simpatico, see? but it does exist, and he is one example of, apart from being a volcanic creator, of the most delicious personality, a wonderful person.
Io vorrei chiedere una cosa. Lei ha detto che ha 2 bravi allievi, uno coreano e uno indiano, che ovviamente hanno un livello di tecnicismo già avanzato, perché ha detto anche che dopo un po' di tempo presentano un numero di composizioni importanti, di cui lei evidentemente si occupa. Poi ha detto anche che fanno progressi. Come si fa a capire quando un musicista che è già tecnicamente avanzato e si ritiene artista, diciamo, nel senso che abbiamo precisato prima, fa progressi? Una cosa che non riesco a capire.
I could be entirely wrong, and it could be an illusion, but when I'm doing it, I am very, very convinced. I can think of one student I have at the moment who showed a lot of creativity 2 years ago, before we started working together, but the music was full of mannerisms. The form was not clear, it was uncontrolled, and therefore the expressivity of the music was not individual, it was the worst thing, generic. That's the bad one, generic, like everybody else, and not focused, not in focus. It's not my doing at all, but in the time that we've spent together, he has been very creative, and you can just see the forms are much more interesting and more mastered. The writing for the instruments is more individual and has more personality. The quality of hearing from moment to moment in the score. Because I'm a composer but also a conductor, I have some knowledge of reading things, and you can just see it's like an animal's whose bones are in the wrong place, and then suddenly they begin to come into the right place, and you can see the skeleton produces a better edifice, a better animal. So I don't know if this will be a creator of great individuality, even someone of a gigantic talent. There's a possibility, but I can see progress, and I'm sure Ivan would agree with me about that.
Okay. Grazie George, grazie a voi per essere venuti per i minuti e ti do appuntamento a stasera al Teatro Goldoni.